Okay, thank you. So what we will be doing today at this moment is recognizing some presentation items that are not requiring any action from the board. So Anna, would you like to for the first item for presentation?
So the first item is going to be item 4A, presenting certificate to Transdev's Employee of the Month for January 2026. In the absence of Ms. Sylvia Valcasa, this will be presented by Jennifer Garcia. Thank you.
Okay, so as we usually do, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here and spending your Friday afternoon with us. I apologize for the rescheduling, but we're really, really honored to be able to recognize the Employee of the Month through Transdev. We know that we wouldn't have a stellar transit authority without our wonderful employees. So this month we are recognizing Ms. Rosario for her service.
I just want to say Rosario is one of our best drivers. But she always creates a welcoming environment in our buses. She follows policies and the safest possible way to do it. She does it. And I just want to thank her.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gracias.
Okay, then we have another presentation. Miss Molly Science is not here as of yet, so we'll go ahead and go into the presentation from the District, County, and District Retirement System. And this is regarding El Paso Transportation Authority's participation. Then we do have on the line Christina Fox, who is the Development Manager with Employer Services from TCDRS. And Christina, do you have slides that you would like to present?
No, good afternoon, everyone. I do not, and that is because I plan to be at your March board meeting in person, where I will deliver a full presentation to the board. And I believe at that time it will be up for a vote. So this is just a little high level overview of what is to come in that meeting.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you briefly this afternoon. I've been working with John over the past few months about the possibility of transitioning the staff there at the Transportation Authority into their own TCDRS retirement plan, separate from El Paso County. And we have done the cost study, and it has come back, and to mirror county benefits and even enhance those benefits a little bit, the cost would actually be lower to the Transportation Authority, in large part because of the varying demographics from the county, which has over 3,000 employees, to the Transportation Authority there that only has a handful. And so that has a cost lowering effect for you all. And like I said, it does include enhancements, which include a 5-year vest instead of an 8-year vest, and also adding a group term life policy there for the employees. At the March board meeting, I will have packets for you all that will include detailed analysis on these costs associated with this proposed plan, as well as slides that will cover who TCDRS is as a system, how the plan works, and how it is funded. But essentially, it is really going to be the exact same as the accounts that they are currently managing through El Paso County. It's just they're now going to have a separate account that they will begin to manage if and when the board approves separating from the county and creating its own plan with TCDRS.
Christina, do you mind talking about, because I've shared the presentation with the board, it's in the packet, as well as the rate schedule, but do you mind just talking about the impacts that we did discuss? Like if we were to create a separate account, how does that work for the employees presently as it relates to our county employment, and how that ties in together at the end of retirement?
So no money can be combined with separate accounts. Each plan has its own set of funding and liabilities. So the way that it would work is that the members would remain county employees until the transition date, so there would be no break in coverage. And then as of participation with the Transportation Authority, they would stop participating with El Paso County. Those accounts will then be theirs, and they can choose to leave them open and continue to draw interest and eventually retire from their El Paso County account. Or they can choose to close it out if they want. That would not be my recommendation because they would be forfeiting the employer match of El Paso County, but they will certainly have access to their accounts at El Paso County at that time. All of the time that they have put in through El Paso County will count towards meeting vesting and retirement eligibility provisions that the Transportation Authority would adopt for its separate plan. So they're not losing anything. It's just they're going to start contributing to a separate plan. They will then manage two plans within TCDRS, one from El Paso County and one from El Paso Transportation Authority.
And to be clear, on the case of the two employees that have not vested, if the board approves a 5-year vesting, the two employees can still vest under El Paso County if they meet ETA's requirements and the county's requirements?
Yes, they would have to meet the county's 8-year requirement. So however long they would be working at ETA, those years would count towards meeting however many years they lacked at the county. So it still would be possible for them to vest with the county at a later date and receive, if they left their account open, receive the employer match and retirement benefits that they were working towards at the county. And then with a 5-year vest, if that is what is adopted with ETA, then they would vest sooner than they would if they remained with the county.
Carl, you had a question?
Yes, I had a few questions. So essentially, it's like a PRP between these two proportionate retirement plan. So between the county and the ETA, at a point at which an ETA employee would retire, they get one retirement check funded by the two source accounts, right?
Yes, they would. This is all contingent on them keeping their El Paso County account open. And if they did, yes, and when they meet the vesting and retirement eligibility provisions with the county, they can retire from that county account based on how much they've saved up and interest accumulated within that account. And then they would draw a separate retirement from El Paso Transportation Authority when they decide that they want to start drawing that benefit. That can happen at the same time, or it can happen at different periods. So they can choose to leave one account open and still earning interest and draw it at a separate time than their El Paso Transportation Authority account.
But their ETA service only counts as county time for vesting purposes, correct?
Vesting and retirement eligibility.
But not towards benefits.
No, that does essentially equate to the benefit because they have to be vested to earn the right to the matching dollars that both entities are promising, but then they have to become age eligible to start drawing that benefit.
Well, that was my other question. So are you saying that they're accumulating a match from both the county and ETA simultaneously?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the county's freezes, right? Because you're not contributing any more salary to the county, but the interest continues as long as the account stays open.
But there's not a match being made. It's just the interest.
It's just the interest.
Well, no, they'll get the match from the county when they're age eligible with the county. Absolutely.
And I apologize because yes, your benefit is a match at the time of retirement. Okay.
Yes.
It's not in. So I apologize. Yeah, that makes sense now. I'm just trying to think of the other question. It was the main question I had, but anyway, maybe I'll come back to it in a second if somebody else has a question.
And this is just the first conversation. We're gonna.
It is, yes, absolutely.
So we appreciate kind of like a preview.
A
since
very
I know-
high, yes, a very high level preview.
Okay, go ahead.
Or not looking at the beneficiaries, but more looking at it from ETA standpoint. What are the regulatory responsibilities for the LGC? In other words, what services does TCDRS perform as far as the regulatory requirements like funding plans and audits and things like that? Is that a responsibility the ETA holds, or do you assist?
Absolutely. ETA will hold that responsibility. You will become the essentially owner of the plan, and TCDRS is the fiduciary. So we are the money that you and your employees are sending into TCDRS. We are taking that and investing it in the same manner that we are doing it for all of the employees at El Paso County. But the ETA will begin to have its own plan, meaning that you will start to accumulate your own assets as well as your own liabilities. And we will draw up all of that auditing information, GASB 68, everything along those lines, SOC 1 reporting. We will do all of that during the valuation period and provide those documents to you all, since you will be operating your own plan.
So you're sharing the data, but it's our responsibility to comply with PRB rules and regs directly on our own.
Yes, our main regulation from you all participating in your own plan is that the required rate that we present to you, which when I presented in March, is lower than what the county is paying. That is a required rate, and it is variable, so it can go up or down from year to year. And the three main things that impact that rate are payroll variation, employee demographics, and investment returns that the system is bringing in. And the rate will be adjusted the following year when the actuary reviews the plan at the end of the year to determine if the amount of money that you're sending in to advance to fund future promise benefits is enough to adequately fund those future promise benefits. So you're essentially advance funding what you're promising the employees in the future. And we will provide you with all of that analysis as well as evaluation on an annual basis of your plan, of ETA's plan. And that will be completely separate from El Paso County's plan.
So the takeaway for the board is, unless we get support from the county, the cost presented is basically just for the benefits. All of the administrative and regulatory, and can be extensive. Even if the plan's small, that burden now falls on the organization unless we can get it. I don't know if you were talking about maybe contracting that part with the county.
That's correct. That's some of the discussions that I've been having with El Paso County Human Resources, that we could potentially replicate under an interlocal, that they can administer that on our behalf.
For a cost.
For our cost, yes. So just so the board's aware, for the benefit portion of the cost, at a 5-year vest, we're at $54,957 for the first year. And that's taking into consideration the current employees. And then as we add the additional 4 employees, of course, that will slightly increase. Those costs are already budgeted into our existing grants that we have today with El Paso County. And we would continue those same costs in the future under grants under EPATS's name. So I don't foresee any fiscal challenges with continuing that cost.
And since the match is made at the time of retirement, how will ETA be managing the cost? It's not invested?
That's something that we'll have to continue to discuss with this board, because as we're starting out fresh as a young organization, we need to start building operating reserves to cover like our operational expenses, as well as be able to cover future retirements, since we'll be covering the retirements of the employees from the start now, while the county's covering the portion prior to the assumption of the employees.
And that's
So that's
essentially, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's what that $54,000 a year, that's what it's going to fund. That is strictly the amount, because we don't charge administrative fees to anybody that participates with us. That is strictly the amount that you'd be sending in for a year's time to advance fund the future $2.50 per dollar match that you're promising the employees if they vest, make it to eligibility, and retire from ETA. That is what that cost is.
That drawdown happens, what, monthly, annually?
Well, you will make payments to TCDRS, the member contributions and ETA's portion on a monthly basis. That way we're able to capture anybody that terminates and any new hires. So we will be getting payroll reports from you monthly. They're actually really easy to submit. I might talk to John about that. I think you can save money not having to contract with the county because it's super simple to enroll employees and send us a monthly payroll report because those are the only administrative functions that you really have to do. So that is the money that you would be sending in would be going into what we call your subdivision accumulation fund for ETA. That is where we would be keeping the money that is available for the match down the road. But of course, all the money coming in from your organization, from the county, from all of the members, that is all pooled together for investment purposes to fund the future benefits that will eventually be paid to the members that retire.
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have questions at this time? Okay. Again, we'll bring this back for more detailed information next month. Thank you very much, Christina, for the presentation.
Thank you all very much.
We'll now move back onto item 4B, receive a report from the Access Advisory Committee Chair for activities in fall quarter 2025, Molly Science.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry for being late. I had an emergency at work, but thank you for having me here to present for you all. It's nice to see you all again. So we met on January the 28th. During our meeting, we decided to go ahead and remove 2 of our writers that were representing the writer category, as they were 2 individuals who we have never met her. She had never been in attendance in any of our meetings. And then the second, he stopped coming to our meetings, but also we found out that he wasn't residing within the El Paso County area. So we did fill one of those vacancies, and that was with Mr. Adrian Hatcher. He lives out in the Montana Vista area. He does have a child as well that has a disability, and he has a disability himself. We also decided that we were going to remove another individual from our agency category as he was no longer attending our meetings as well. And we went ahead and we voted in and we added Ms. Andrea Ramirez from Project Amistad. I believe she is on this call today too. And then we went ahead and we started talking about our bylaw changes. One of the things that we started noticing, receiving the committee recommendations from people who wanted to be a part of the committee, we started noticing that a lot were parents of individuals who have disabilities, and these are mobility disabilities. So as a group, many of us work with those with disabilities too, and many times the caregivers or the guardians are the ones who are calling in to reserve the ride spots for the individual who's going to be riding, but as well as they are sometimes the ones who would attend that ride with them. So they're the person who is helping, making sure that they're getting to where they need to be. So we feel that these are the voices that are very important, as they know how it is to go ahead and schedule a ride, what it takes, what might we need to fix when scheduling rides, but also being a part of those rides too, which can bring a great perspective. So we are wanting to make changes on that bylaw to consider those guardians to be part of that portion of the categories. Another thing that we were discussing in regards to our bylaws were go ahead and reviewing committee members' terms. Many of us did have terms put aside before Mr. Ando joined, but afterwards we've decided that we need to go ahead and relook at those terms. Other than that, we don't have anything else for me to present on. If you guys have any questions, I'm more than welcome to answer any.
So much. Can you remind us how often the committee meets?
We are meeting quarterly. So January, the next one is May, and then so far.
Any questions from the board? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And sorry, once again, sorry for tardiness. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Okay, up to 4A right now.
We're going to jump to,
Or has a question?
yes.
I was thinking about it. Are the members approved by the board? Or
Yes, per the bylaws for the AAC, we have to bring the members that they would like to appoint. They make the recommendation,
okay,
and then it comes back to this board to approve. And you'll see that on the consent calendar for 2 items, for 2 potential new members.
We already did 40. So do you know
Sorry.
6A?
Like say yes.
Yes. Okay, we're going to jump to the regular agenda. Presentation by Michael Watt. Are you on, Michael?
I am on. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, then I'll go ahead and get started. And y'all should have received these slides in your board packet. And sorry, let me get the slideshow actually queued up here. Okay. So just quickly confirm that everybody can see my slides okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Okay, so thank you for your time. This is Michael Walk with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, and I'm here today to give you a couple of updates on budget activities and financial planning activities that we've been performing on behalf of ETA. The agenda is broken into really these 2 main chunks. The first are updates on works in progress revolving around FY26 and FY27 financial planning. And then after that, we'd like to walk the board through the final draft results of our work forecasting rural and urban transit grant funding for FY26 and FY27. So starting with the work in progress updates, as y'all might remember, the board approved the FY26 budget on September 24th of 2025. There have been several changes based on changes in purchase transportation contracts, updates to capital spending, as well as service and fare policy changes, as well as other minor updates that impact actual spending in FY26. And with those changes, it's necessary to revise the FY26 budget to get it more in line with where we actually stand in FY26. So we wanted to let y'all know we are working on that. We're planning to, in the March meeting, bring an FY26 revised budget back to the board, incorporating all the changes that I mentioned before. We are planning to include with that revised budget what we call a monthly operational spending plan. So that would be an anticipated operational spending by month for the last half of the fiscal year from April through September, to give sort of a benchmark of what was expected spending for the remainder of the fiscal year. And we also are working on revising the line item budgets in ETA's grants. That is the rural grants, 5311 grants, and how much money is set aside in each of the line items in those budgets, ensuring that the budget line items on those grants aligns with the spending plan for FY26, and also looking into FY27. So those are things we're going to come to the board with in March. Just wanted to let the board know that that activity is underway. Any questions on that?
No questions.
Seeing none? Okay. The other work that's currently underway is getting ready for the FY27 financial plan and contribution amounts. Our ongoing annual process to take a look at FY27 service and then determine contribution amounts from all the participating entities. That work is underway. We're currently collecting information about FY27 plans, including looking at the transition plan and how that might impact FY27 spending, potential service changes, as well as assumptions around grants. Again, in March next month, we are planning to bring to the board for its review the FY27 service and financial plan with those contribution amounts, so that you have an early look at those numbers and can start planning ahead for your own local budget process. We're planning to bring two different scenarios for FY27 at this time. These two scenarios are the first scenario is implementing all the service improvements that are currently in the TDP or the Transit Development Plan. And then we're also planning to bring what we would call a status quo or no service change scenario. So you can see how the service plan, the FY27 service plan, if you put everything in FY27 all at once, sort of what does that mean when it comes to contribution amounts versus if no new service is implemented in FY27, just to give that initial range of the impact.
Michael, I have a question on this. Would it be possible to add a third scenario, which would be maybe phasing in parts of the TDP?
It certainly is possible. I'd request some guidance on what elements of the TDP would be prioritized for inclusion in that third scenario.
Okay. And I appreciate us starting this process now. I feel like we've been trying to, every year we try to bring the budget review to each municipality early, and we struggle with that. So hopefully this year we'll be able to get budget numbers to your municipalities by May. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have, when it comes to the FY27 planning, some considerations that we wanted to bring to the board's attention and see if there's any particular ideas or direction from the board for us to consider. So I'm going to talk about these in turn. Really, the first three are the main ones, but really the first two, which are how do we allocate the costs and the contributions for ETA's demand response service? So I'm going to walk us through just two options for that, what that looks like. The second consideration is whether or not to include a capital fund contribution in the FY27 financial plan. Again, I'll walk us through those options. And there's a couple of other things that I'll walk us through just so you see the results of those. For instance, we costed out how much it would cost for ETA to potentially operate Socorro's microtransit service. That was a cost estimate John asked us to put together, so we wanted to share that with the board. And as a reminder, now there's no fund balance like there was in 2026, which to reduce contributions. If y'all might remember, FY26, there was a fund balance left over from contributions. And so in FY27, to our knowledge at this point, there's not going to be this fund balance, which will reduce everybody's contributions. So it'll be sort of straight up costs. So the first discussion point is around how to allocate the cost of demand response service. There's really two main options that I'm putting on the table for discussion. And the first, and we're thinking of both the ETA's access or the ADA paratransit service, as well as the on-delay service, the on-demand service, because they're operated with the same vehicles. So the two methods that are often used are using population of the entity versus trips that are taking place in the entity. So it's a population-based versus a trip-based approach. The population-based is what we're doing right now, and we have been doing since this whole process started. And we allocate the cost of demand response to each member based on that member's population. It's essentially everybody pays a share in proportion to the potential for demand, right? When we think about the more people there are, the more likely you're going to have demand response trips. And so your contribution is going to be larger simply because you have more people living in your area. So that's how we've been doing it in the past, and largely because there was no trip data, right? We didn't have actual demand data. An additional option to consider is using a form of a trip-based cost allocation option. And in this case, which is on the bottom half of the slide, right, demand response costs are actually allocated based on trips taken. We have historical data on ETA access trips, and we know where they're being taken, origins and destinations. And in this case, members pay based on actual observed demand, assuming that demand is a predictor of future demand. And because of the model right now, all contributions are made at the beginning of the fiscal year, right? Where all the contribution is always a prediction of costs, right? And so in this case, we'd have to use historical trip data as a proxy for future trips, and then allocate costs and contributions based on that. Now, there's some complexities there, right? If you don't have anybody in your region taking any trips, then you might not pay, even if there is a vehicle available. There's some complexities with trip assignment. You know, do we assign a trip to a jurisdiction based on the origin, the destination, on both, or some sort of splitting method? How do we handle premium trips which go into downtown El Paso? And so these are some of the considerations. We wanted to raise this discussion just to have it here with the board. You know, as we're getting into actually calculating these contributions, we're going to have to pick an approach and bring it to the board in March. And so I wanted to pause there and see if there's questions about these different ideas and if there's any particular preference among the board on these items.
What do you think, John?
This is a tough one. I would probably continue for the time being to allocate on member population, just because access is still developing and the ridership can shift. I've started to give the board, as part of my director's report, data on who's using access based on passenger trips and based on the clients, because I know some of the jurisdictions have asked those questions. I think after a couple years of consistent access service, we'll have a true idea of who's using the program, and then shifting to a trip-based method might make better sense. If I'm looking at it from today at face value.
Michael, is the geographic size of the entity also factored in?
Not directly. It would only be factored in because there might be more people inside the entity's boundaries. There, currently, we're only looking at the population within the fixed route buffer, right? So the ADA paratransit buffer around fixed route. So the more fixed route you have in your jurisdiction, the more people you have eligible to take ADA paratransit because they live within the 3/4 of a mile. That's the population value we've been using to date, because ADA paratransit was the only demand response option. Now that there's other demand response options, we'll probably modify that approach and look at the entity's entire population that has access to service.
And Michael, maybe another option too is look at the senior and persons with disabilities census population data of the jurisdictions within that ADA buffer to really hone in on that. And for on delay, look at the general population, because that will also change some of the dynamics if we look at it from that standpoint.
That is true.
And I believe census gives us that data already for seniors and disabled.
I think one thing we learned in doing similar interlocals for like vector control and air quality with the member organizations is that the advantage of population for the municipalities, it's very predictable. You know, it's not going to change very much from year to year, so it's a lot easier to budget and plan, whereas trips can vary significantly from one year to the next, and that just kind of throws the councils off. Like, well, last year it was only this amount, now it's double. Why? Because you have more demand. Well, maybe we need to, so I think population's always a little bit more stable approach, unless it's inaccurate.
Okay.
I agree. Okay.
And also, once established, it's going to be, you know, forever and ever. Could always be tweaked.
Great, thank you. So we'll walk ahead with a population-based approach, and then John, the additional considerations you had mentioned, we'll see if we can factor those into our allocation. The other option for the FY27 contributions is whether or not to include any sort of capital fund contribution. And the options I'm presenting right now are sort of like a none and a yes option. And if none is how currently things have been going, where none of the local match for replacing capital assets have been part of any member's contribution to date. So, and of course that has been working because the TxDOT has been providing the local match for us through toll development or transportation development credits or TDCs. So that's been working fine. Of course, there's risks to that, right? When eventually that match might not be available, or capital assets need replaced in the future, all of a sudden might need to pay more to try to replace those vehicles or upgrade a facility, et cetera. The other option is to start working on developing a fund to replace capital assets. It could be an annual amount, maybe focusing on specific assets like vehicles versus instead of everything, because there's facilities, vehicles, shelters, et cetera. So there's a lot of options on sort of the how to do a contribution to start developing a capital fund. And essentially, we wanted to bring this up just for discussion again. When we prepare the March contribution amounts, should we, include a capital fund contribution using some method when we have to do some research to figure out the best approach, or for now, not include a capital fund contribution?
I do want to add, we are fortunate that the vehicles are very new. We just got 7 new cutaway buses that are replacing 7 of our older vehicles. So it'll be about, at the minimum, 4 to 5 years before we'll need to start replacing assets. But there is going to be a need where we need to start developing a capital replacement fund, so that in the event that there's no TDCs, transportation development credits, either on the 5307 urban side or the 5311 rural side, that we can use those match funds to pay. We're also fortunate that the county has contributed $1.5 billion in costs for the acquisition of the facility, and that Texas is throwing in state funds to pay for the local match for the construction of the facility. So we're coming in with basically brand new assets for this organization. But we do need to think long-term in the future about the replacement of those assets as they reach their useful life under FTA's minimum standards.
Yeah, one thing we did in our interlocals, and I think it's very essential to start capturing that capital cost when you get the new equipment. What we did to avoid the spikes was we booked the depreciated amount. So if you have a 11-year expected life or whatever your depreciation policy is, then you just charge that amount every year for each asset. And again, this is a lot better for predictability from one budget year to the next, but you capture it incrementally, and it's essential that you grab that cost. Otherwise, you're going to get years where you're just paying crazy amounts, especially for the smaller municipalities. It's problematic.
I agree. I'm in favor of beginning the process of developing a fund.
Okay. So we can put together a method and include it in our March presentation, and just keep it separate from the operational costs, so you can see that dollar figure and then the capital fund amount, so you can see those side by side, and then the board can decide how it wants to proceed at that point. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. Thank you, Michael.
Okay. I apparently have a very long presentation, so I'm sorry. This slide is really more for reference than for anything else. One of the things that John did ask us to do is to forecast the cost of running the Socorro's microtransit service using TransDev, right? So the contractor that ETA currently is using. And so we worked up a cost estimate that includes both the variable cost using TransDev's variable cost rate per hour, as well as a portion of TransDev's fixed costs that were allocable to the service. And we showed three options here: 1 vehicle, 1.5, and 2, just to kind of give a spectrum of. We don't really know how many vehicles are out all of the time on the service. We do know the service runs Monday through Friday, 6 to 6. So whether 2 vehicles are out there that entire span is uncertain. So we wanted to show, you know, if 1 vehicle was adequate versus maybe just 1 vehicle being out all day and another vehicle being out half a day, what that cost range would look like. So the totals are here in the middle. This is annual, right? So it's the variable cost plus the allocated fixed cost gives us the total cost. And then we're just showing the 50-50 split, assuming Socorro was able to at least get 50% reimbursement on that cost. Again, this is just for informational purposes. At this time, we're not planning to include this in the FY27 financial plan unless we receive a direction otherwise.
So for this effort to, since Socorro is pursuing direct recipient status with the Federal Transit Administration, we would in theory be a contractor to Socorro if we were to operate their transit system. So we would bill them at 100%, which would be the total costs. They would do the drawdown of the FTA share directly from FTA, and then they would then match that at 50% with their general funds. So that kind of gives a perspective if ETA ran their service, what it would cost us to do it, what it would cost them to do it from their general fund, and what they would receive from the FTA. They are fare free, so there's no program income to net from.
Right. And just to add that we haven't had informal discussions with Socorro, the city of Socorro, about operating their microtransit service. The goal here, which is the same as it's always been, is to maximize the resources we have collectively to elevate the level of service that we're able to provide countywide. And so this I'm assuming will be presented to the members of the board and leadership at the city of Socorro for their consideration. And if there's a way that we can help them, we certainly want to. So,
correct.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Shall I move on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the last part of the presentation is to walk the board through our funding forecast work, looking at rural and urban transit grants. We consider these our final draft results for the board to take a look at. The scope of work included forecasting for both FY26 and FY27 4 different grant programs. And that includes 2 rural programs, the state rural program funded by TxDOT, and the Section 5311 funds, which come from FTA but are allocated to ETA through TxDOT. And then 2 urban programs, both from the FTA, particularly the Section 5307 and the Section 5339 programs. Section 5339 is the bus and bus facilities program. So the results that I'll show you today, because it's 2 years, 4 different programs, it's a lot of numbers. And the fact that we also have additional scenarios, which I'm going to talk to you about. I'm not going to show you every single calculation, okay? But we'll just try to walk us through what numbers we did get and how we got there so that everybody's on the same page in terms of the method. So we're starting with the urban funding programs. Remember, this is the 2 funding programs, Section 5307 and Section 5339 for bus and bus facilities. And as a reminder, you know, those funds are apportioned to the actual urbanized area, which is El Paso, Texas, and New Mexico. A portion of the urbanized area is in New Mexico. The city is the designated recipient of those funds, and the service expansion policy is what dictates how other parties operating transit in the urbanized area may be able to access those funds, as you are probably very familiar with all the discussions that have been going on. Currently, that policy stipulates that the FTA urban funding is allocated using each entity's population, that falls outside of the Sun Metro service area, but is also urban. So in order to start this forecasting exercise and figure out, well, how much money might be available in these grant programs and specifically to each party in these future years, we had to first start by forecasting the estimated apportionment that the FTA would potentially make available to the El Paso urbanized area for both of these programs in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. And so you'll see the table here shows you the Texas portion of the money that we forecasted to be available. Sorry, let me backtrack. Yes, sorry, I'm messing my numbers up. Sorry, this is the total UZA number, 5307 here, 5339, and in order to do these forecasts, we're using service data from FY24 and FY25. So FY24 service data feeds into the FY26 apportionment amount, okay? Now, we have no idea what FTA will actually award in a way because there's obviously uncertainty when it comes to apportionments, et cetera. So we did assume that the funding that was available in FY25 remains constant through these 2 years, just to give us sort of a baseline. So the only thing that changes from year to year is what service data is included in the fiscal year forecast.
One thing the board should be made aware of is federal fiscal year 26 is the last year of the current IIJA bill. And Congress is now in discussions of a new surface transportation bill. So everything could change in fiscal year 27, but we're assuming that with these figures that they're going to continue the same methodology that they've done with the IIJA. But just be mindful that FY27 is a toss-up at this point.
Thanks, John. Okay, so this was the starting point for the urban forecast, and I'm just going to draw your attention to this 24 million number. So we forecasted FY27 apportionment of section 5307 would be $24 million. The exercise that we went through then was to figure out, okay, if that is the apportionment, we have this $24 million of 5307 funds, then how does that get split among all of the entities operating in the UZA, right? And so the first split that happens is those dollars, the 24 million, is split between Texas and New Mexico. The FTA does that. So this split here is determined by the FTA. They use the population that's in New Mexico versus the population that's in Texas, and they just split the dollars that way. So Texas gets 23.14 million of the 24, okay? The next step is then how do we split the 23.14 million across Sun Metro, ETA, and Socorro? And as a reminder, the service expansion policy stipulates here that this is based on population, right? So the how is based on population. We are going to show the board other allocation scenarios for reference. So we ran 3 different hows, right? So the what we call allocation scenarios. The first is a population-based approach, which is currently in the SEP. And then we ran 2 different options that use the FTA's formula in order to allocate the dollars to each entity. And the FTA's formula is much more complicated, right? It's not just a simple population, there's lots of factors. So we had 2 different options for the FTA formula, and I'll explain why we ran 2 when you start to see the results. But the first option uses the entire FTA formula, and then the second option uses individual factors in the FTA formula, which will be clearer when I show you the examples. Right, so we're still answering that how question, right? The 3 different ways to allocate that apportionment to Texas for the UZA and split between the 3 different parties. So this is the population-based approach, right? This is what's in the SEP. And you can see the top table here is the population as of the last census in each entity's boundaries. That's also part of the urbanized area. and then the resulting forecast or the resulting split, right? So Sun Metro has 82% of the population of the urbanized area, and so it would receive 82% of the $23 million available to Texas. And ETA has 14%.
Michael, that's the combined 5307 and 5339?
This is just 5307.
Just 5307.
So there is a big jump in the FY27 forecast of 5307 because it includes much more urban data from ETA. So it's a much higher number than has previously been awarded to the UZA. Does that answer your question, Carl?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the option one, that's the population option. So the other scenarios we wanted to show are using the FTA formula. Now it's way beyond the scope of this presentation and you probably would want me to stop talking, maybe you already do, about the FTA's formula. There's many different factors in the FTA's section 5307 formula, includes things like population, population density, low income population, as well as service data elements, for instance, revenue miles, passenger miles, and operating costs. So the FTA factors all these factors in when they are apportioning money to the UZA, and each of these factors does not have equal weight in the formula. For example, revenue miles counts for about 50% of the formula that FTA uses. Population counts for about 25% of the formula that FTA uses. So if you use the FTA formula and then apply it, you get different results. So these are how we calculated the apportionments to each, or allocations to each of the three entities if we use the FTA formula, okay? So there was a multi-step process, but essentially we ran the formula for each entity individually, just using its service data and its population, calculated an independent apportionment, and then based on how much money each entity generated using that formula, what percentage, we assigned to each entity a portion of the $23 million that were available, right? So Sun Metro's independent apportionment, if it was the only entity in the region and it's only its population, right, inside its boundaries and its service area is 16.5 million, which amounts for 60% of what would be allocated if all three entities were separate. And we gave Sun Metro 60% of what we forecasted to be available, which is about 14 million. Same thing for ETA. You'll notice when we compare these numbers to the population approach, which is here, there's a significant difference, right? So the population-based approach is the left two columns. We can see, in this case, ETA would receive 14% of the 23 million. If you follow the FTA's formula approach, it's 38% of that 23 million, which is a very significant change. You might ask why. The reason that happens is that ETA's service data is very significant. It has a total of 5.4 million revenue miles out of 13.7 million total in the UZA. And also ETA contributes a significant portion of passenger miles to the UZA. And that's why this approach results in a much different result.
Does that include, is that van pool data included in that? Okay.
Yes.
That's actually miles inside the city limits, though, of El Paso.
The van pool service that ETA operates, Carl?
Yeah. So maybe I asked that the wrong way. Are you dissecting those trips to determine which portion of that trip was inside the city versus in the county?
No. So this is, the miles are diced to determine how many fall within the urbanized area versus within the rural area. So the miles here are urban only van pool miles and urban only bus miles.
So they count towards the urban allocation, but as we're splitting them by jurisdiction, that would matter where the trip actually originates and terminates, right? Or the portion of the trip would have to be allocated to each entity?
No, the reason why we don't do that is because the county is paying the match to the van pool program, not the jurisdictions. So if the jurisdictions were paying the local match, I think I could see your point on allocating those miles back to the respective jurisdiction. But this is on a financial standpoint, the county's paid 100% of that match.
Yeah, I think that would be probably a point of debate.
It could, but I mean, when I've looked at other regions that have done the same thing, the van pool miles goes back to the operator that is basically that's contracted for the service and is paying the appropriate matches for the service. So in theory, Sun Metro could start a van pool program. And in theory, some of those vans could shift to Sun Metro's van pool program, but I'll be hard pressed to say that we should allocate those van pool miles if we're not getting any contribution from the city to pay for the local match of those trips originating or ending in the city limits. Because that just wouldn't be equitable and fair.
I had a question about the previous slide where you had the total added up to 27 million on step one.
Mm-hmm.
That you said you came about that calculation for each entity if you applied the formula to their data in a vacuum.
Correct.
So there's
sorry, go ahead, Carl.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so it totals to be more than what's available when all the data is combined. Is that where you're going with your question, perhaps?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand where I guess this is because ETA and Socorro have never received an allocation, which is why that number hasn't been relevant until now, I guess is what I'm questioning.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly true. I mean, so, when you have multiple operators in a UZA, all of their data is combined from the FTA's perspective, right? And when all the data is combined, then FTA calculates how much money should be apportioned to that UZA. If one entity has really high cost efficiency, in this case, ETA does because of the van pool program, for example, right? So that factor in the FTA formula, if ETA was the only entity operating in the UZA, that's the approximate apportionment the FTA would award based on just ETA's service data and the population falling within ETA's boundaries. And that's why those numbers don't add up to the total, because independently, its ratio level data doesn't work mathematically that it would, everybody has just a share. Does that address your question, Carl? Yep. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So, we got to these results and basically said, wow, that's a really, really big change. It's a very big delta from the population-based approach. Might there be a more conservative approach to still use the FTA's formula, just to see how could you still use the FTA formula and factor in the operating data of each entity? So this last approach we went factor by factor. If you remember, I said the FTA formula has many factors: population density, etc. So rather than running the entire formula, we would go one factor at a time, and we would look at the population factor and say, okay, just based on each entity's population, how much of the money we anticipated would be available based on population. In this case, it was $3 million out of the 23 and change. Just $3 million is available to population. So let's split that $3 million to each entity based on its share of the population. Okay. And they would repeat that process for each factor in the FTA formula, right? Factor by factor. Now, rather than show you every single calculation that we did along the way, we tried to group them all together in terms of the final results. The columns of this table are the different factors in the FTA formula. And so what you're seeing here is that factor by factor allocation. So that Texas portion of the population money is 3.1 million. If we allocated that 3.1 million to each entity based on its share of the population, this would be the split. Same thing with the population density factor, right? This would be the split, revenue miles, and down the line, right? Factor by factor. And then you add all these up. Now those other factors, this slide shows the fixed guideway factor, which is only attributable to Sun Metro because it's the only one that operates fixed guideway service. And so you see it gets 100% of the credit for fixed guideway money. So this shows you the three options side by side just for 5307 for FY27. I just added one additional column here, which is option 2 of the FTA formula. This is the factor by factor option in the far right-hand side. It does change how much money would be available. It does reduce ETA's share by a little, by about 1.4 million and change, down to 32%. So in summary, these are three options that we analyzed, these 3 different scenarios. So we could show the board, sort of the pros and cons of a population-only approach versus one that factors in service data using the FTA formula. There are other possible ways to do, to cut the pie. We did the same work for 5339, the other urban grant program. We did the same work for the rural funding. Although rural, we didn't run multiple scenarios. And I want to point out here that the forecasted rural funding for ETA is going to be about $2 million less than prior levels. And this is because they're reporting more of their data to the urbanized area. Therefore, y'all have less rural money available. So that's important to remember because this number used to be maybe 3 million or more annually in rural funds. And this final chart shows when you add the urban and the rural dollars together for all 3 entities and the 3 different approaches, population-based, the FTA formula option 1 and FTA formula option 2, when we went factor by factor, what that sort of put everything together for FY27, what do those results look like? I have a limitation slide on the next slide. So it's just, obviously, we didn't have everything. We don't have Socorro service data, although in the big picture, it's going to be very marginal in terms of the additional allocation to Socorro. As John already mentioned, the federal funding levels past FY26 are still uncertain, and FY27 is highly uncertain. There's other methods available, right? It could be based on expenses or just based on miles alone. There might be some other ways to look at it that aren't as complex as the FTA formula. But it's important to recognize that as ETA starts to report its data more as urban, which it has in FY25, it will lose rural money and more urban money will come to the El Paso UZA because of that data being reported to the urban NTD or National Transit Database. So it'll be important that that's considered as ETA moves forward. Questions?
And Madam Chair, if I may add, I just want to preface to the board, this is information being shared to you now because it's going to be very important for as we prepare the fiscal year 27 financial plan and the fiscal year 27 budget, because of the significant shift of monies that previously the county received under TxDOT is now going to be cut significantly to under ETA, and our real main revenue source is going to be 5307 urban. There are different matching requirements from rural to urban, even though they're somewhat the same. There's still different ways you could charge certain expenses. So we need to ensure that we're getting the maximum amount of urban funds if we want to continue to keep the current service levels today. And if the board still has a desire to want to expand and add those additional routes in the future as recommended by TTI. If we don't take that into consideration, what's going to happen is our costs are going to continue to escalate. Our revenues on the federal side is not going to catch up with our costs, and we're going to get caught with having to make service reductions, which won't benefit the members as a whole. So that's kind of the intent of this exercise, to prepare you for what's to come in the upcoming fiscal year budget. And we continue discussions with Sun Metro, Socorro, the MPO on the best way to do this to ensure that we can still be made whole, as well as being equitable to the other partners.
Thank you, Michael, for the presentation. There's a lot to think about. I have questions about the process in general, when these decisions will be discussed and made, and who ultimately makes the decision.
So starting, and Carl, to help me if I get anything incorrect, but starting with the federal urban funds, we're already in the discussions with Sun Metro and the MPO. They've put out a policy, asked for comments. We've provided some comments that they're analyzing. They in turn come back with a draft revision that I think we have to meet and collectively agree. That will then go to the MPO board, the Sun Metro board, gets adopted. Sun Metro would then issue a split letter based on that policy. Once we have a split letter, the split letter will authorize us to be a direct recipient, as well as Socorro. We then use that information to file with the FTA to get the direct recipient status. Then whatever numbers in that split letter is basically our number that we can forecast in the upcoming fiscal year 27 budget. Okay.
Yeah, so a little nuance on that is we're going through the policy revisions. We're going through a round of policy revisions. Population change, deviation from the population-based apportionment is not under consideration in this version, and mainly that's because we want to make sure you get the split letter for the FFY 26 funding to get you started on that. I will say, it's very, our mass transit board would have to approve any changes to the policy, which dictates how this is obviously a key part of the policy. I think it would be very unlikely that they're going to accept almost $4 million cut to the Sun Metro budget. So that's kind of the other side of the story. For budgeting purpose, I would probably strongly advise that you look at counting on the population base, because that's what the policy will have this version. Doesn't mean you can't request a policy revision. But now that we have actual hard data, I guess that's a double-edged sword. It's good that we actually have those figures, but the deviation from our Sun Metro budget baseline would be significant. And so that would be a serious hurdle for the city to give up. That's, I guess, the other side of the coin. Hopefully I said that diplomatic. Yes.
So if Sun Metro does not amend the policy, then there's really no option but the population-based option.
That's correct. That's the way the policy is adopted. You do have the ability to request a revision at any time. And John and I agreed in our discussions to get several of the things clarified, which is good for the policy, but to not delay the split letter, because again, you can ask at any time for the policy to be revisited. It is considered by both the MPO and the Mass Transit Board. I think, so if that is requested at a future date, it obviously is going to fully engage our Mass Transit Board aspect of our funding. And so again, the likelihood that significant of a change would be made to our budget, our funding towards our budget, is, a fairly big ask. So, but the process is still
City Council.
And yes, for what we discussed with Sun Metro, for the interest of this fiscal year, following the population census track data is in our best interest. fiscal year. So that'll be for federal fiscal year 26, but ETA fiscal year 27. However, for federal fiscal year 27, ETA fiscal year 28, I strongly believe that, and I'll seek guidance from this board, but we would need some direction on how do we address the formula issue, because we're now going to be contributing and reporting 96% of our service in the urban area. And the current population census information, based on my analysis and TCHA's analysis, will not be sustainable for ETA going into the future, especially if ETA wants to expand and meet continued growth in the areas outside of the city limits.
Did the report show it, or did I miss it, where if you reverted to having majority rural versus urban, was there a comparison towards the total funding available?
The NTAD rules doesn't necessarily allow us to do that.
Okay.
It's really based on where the service is. And because ETA, back as you know, previous to this 2020 census, 2010 census, ETA service was highly rural. As the urbanization has continued.
So that ship has sailed.
That ship has sailed. Why we were able to do it last fiscal year was kind of an anomaly, but that's not the rule and won't be able to continue. Unless we start building up a huge transit system out in the unincorporated areas like east of Montana Vista and south of Tornillo. For instance, I want to get my Spanish.
You know, and on one side, and I realize by the data that TCHI has showed, I mean, population growth is in ETA's long-term to their advantage. The growth is largely occurring on the fringes of the city and outside the city. City populations remain fairly stable over the last 8 years. So, but obviously you can see the differences in the methodology.
So this was just really a discussion for the board at this point. We'll start in the next coming months bringing information for the fiscal year 27 financial plan, which will ultimately convert to a fiscal year 27 budget for this board to adopt. And we'll continue to work cooperatively with Sun Metro and Socorro on advancing to that split letter and the minor policy revisions so we can get there. Because that will be our ticket to becoming a direct recipient of FTA urban funds.
We do look forward to getting that process complete in the very near future.
FTA has not released the fiscal year 26 apportionments yet, so timeline-wise we're on par. But I anticipate that should be coming out fairly soon, since the budget bill was signed by the president not too long ago.
You'll be receiving a letter shortly regarding your transit development plan. So very, very good plan. Very, very in-depth, very well put together. So you'll be receiving that. So you'll be able to check that box off.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael and Kelly, for that. All right, if you wanted to call the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Okay.
and we can get
That was the last item.
for last presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. We will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Pick up the rest of the action items on the agenda.
Today is Friday, February 27, 2026. The time is now 2:49 p.m. The regular meeting of the Board of Directors, the El Paso Area Transportation Services Local Government Corporation, doing business as the El Paso Transportation Authority, is now in open session. Commissioner Jackie Butler is presiding as the chair of the board. The following agenda item will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Commissioner Butler, the next agenda item is a public comment. We do not have anybody signed up for public comment today.
Okay, thank you.
The next item would be on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda comprises items 5A through 5I. Earlier items the board would like to pull.
I don't see any. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
No motion to approve by Commissioner Butler and a second by Mr. Argovio. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Now going back to the regular agenda, onto item 6B, presentation from Texas A&M Transportation Institute regarding the general public demand response trending study and taking action to accept the final report presented by Ms. Kelly Blue.
All right. Okay, one moment here. Apologies in advance if my cat decides to say hello again. I was trying to shoo her out, but she was not cooperating. You can see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep the presentation short, but please feel free to stop me and ask questions if you need to. I want to be respectful of your time, but also make sure we're focusing on the information that's of most interest to the board. So I'm going to provide just a quick overview of the General Public Demand Response Transit Study, the GPDRT study, talk a little bit about the background very briefly, and then really focus this presentation on the service plan, which is a chapter within the final report. So just background, just a really quick recap. The purpose of the study was to plan general public demand response transportation services in the outer county, so in the areas currently not served by ETA or Sun Metro. And we had several different tasks that were involved in this project, some of which generated technical memoranda. We conducted 2 rounds of public engagement. We analyzed existing conditions. We developed 4 different scenarios to analyze. We refined we selected one of those scenarios in consultation with board input and staff input, and we refined it. And then we led to development of the service plan, which spells out the details of how the GPDRT components in the service would work. The final report, several chapters in there that document the progress of the study. The big one for the purposes of the presentation today is chapter 7, which is the GPDRT service plan. So we've previously talked to you about the GPDRT study at a couple of different board meetings, and we also gave a presentation to the Access Advisory Committee back in October. So moving on to the service plan, our approach to the service plan is the same approach generally that we took to developing the scenarios in the GPDRT study. So we had several different sort of guiding principles that we were trying to achieve as we developed alternatives. And then as part of the service plan, we developed, we figured out policies and procedures for how those different services would operate. So the idea is that, service would be available to all the outer county residents, in addition to those within the rest of the ETA service area. We'd connect to key destinations. We'd provide at least 14 hours of service on weekdays and at least 12 hours of service on weekends. We wouldn't be competing for riders with other transportation providers, namely Sun Metro. The service would be easy to use. It would be accessible to individuals that have limited internet, so thus may not be able to use like an online platform to meet all of their trip needs. And we would provide a mix of services to meet needs, but also remain cost effective. The service plan acknowledged that some services might benefit from pilot projects, pilot efforts, and we also considered what the role of existing transit services within the transportation network in the service area. So the service plan is organized. There's an introduction. Again, as a chapter in the final report, you can pull the service plan out and make it a standalone document if needed. You'd have to update some table numbers, but that's about it. So there's an introduction. Then there's a chapter that talks about the 4 different components of GPDRT, the 4 different service types. There's a chapter that talks about how those services are integrated. There's a chapter that talks about implementing them, like laying out a plan. And then there's a chapter that talks about performance measures. So for each component in the service plan, we talk about the service area and zones that apply to that particular component. We talk about service days and hours. We talk about who's eligible for the service, what population is served by that particular service, what kind of trip purposes are served, which generally is all trip purposes. We talked about trip reservation policies or whether a reservation is needed or not, a response time if that applies to that particular service. We talked about scheduling and dispatching procedures and responsibilities, fares and fare payment, implement where applicable, and because again, ETA is a fare free service, technology, ridership forecast, revenue hours or miles forecast, the type of vehicles that would be used to provide the service, who would operate the service, and then other ADA and accessibility issues that are not addressed in other parts of the service plan. So the first component is the dial-a-ride commingled with ADA, which this is, as mentioned in previous presentations, we take the ETA access service, which is currently ADA only, and we allow general public individuals to use that service as well. It's a more efficient use of the fleet, the drivers, and the technology that currently supports ETA access. It's an advanced reservation service. Capacity is prioritized for the ADA eligible riders. And in our report, or in the service plan chapter of the report rather, we talk in more detail about how different types of trips are prioritized, because in addition to having ADA eligible riders, which are those riders that live within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route service and meet the accessibility criteria, like for example, they travel with a wheelchair. We also have individuals that are not in 3/4 of a mile that also may travel with a wheelchair or may have a temporary condition that impacts their ability to access transit service. And then we also have the general public riders, both within 3/4 of a mile of fixed route and outside of 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route. The service overall is zone-based, just like the ETA access service currently is. And again, the idea is that capacity is prioritized for ADA individuals, but it's also prioritized for trips that occur within a single zone versus trips that would travel between different zones in the ETA service area, or trips that would travel to permitted destinations in the Sun Metro service area, like the transfer centers. And the idea behind this type of prioritization based on, interzonal trips and trips into the Sun Metro service area is that before the fare-free policy went into effect, ETA access had a premium transit service option that would allow you for an additional fare to make these interzonal trips and to travel into the Sun Metro service area. But so as to manage capacity and ensure that we always have capacity for the ADA eligible riders within 3/4 miles of Sun Metro, of fixed route. We deprioritized those, what were the premium trips. So they're still possible if capacity is available, but again, capacity is prioritized for the ADA eligible riders. So this map is an updated version of the ETA service zones map currently. The dark purple, the dark orange, and the dark blue polygons are the current ETA access service area. So that's, again, the areas within 3/4 of a mile of ETA fixed route services, where we have an ADA obligation to provide trips. Outside of that, we've extended the service area to include more of the county. So for example, what was this core ADA service area in the East Zone? Well, now the ETA commingled access zone covers more of the county. We've extended the boundary out to the county limits. And we've done the same in the South Zone and in the West Zone as well. Just a quick note, though, just again, trying to make these things as easy as possible for users to use, is that this isn't necessarily a map that a rider would see. This is more about for scheduling and dispatching and trip reservations to see in terms of making sure that they're prioritizing the capacity for the ADA eligible riders. A member of the public calling in would really only see the larger zone and not this, the darker areas, these core ADA zones. So microtransit is the second component, which operates under the ETA On Delay brand. It's an on-demand service. You call and then a bus arrives very shortly to pick you up. It's moving forward, in the service plan, we're modeling future on-delay services after the pilot that's serving San Elizario and Clint right now, which means it's focused on local circulation and providing key connections with a response time of 15 to 30 minutes. So you call to request a trip and the bus should show up within 15 to 30 minutes to pick you up. It's also a zone-based service. It's not using the same zones as ETA access. It's using zones that are more community-oriented. And I have a map on the next slide where I'll show that. Hours and days are comparable to those provided by ETA access. It's for all riders in the outer county and all trip purposes. And you book your trip by phone or in the future by an app. So this is the current pilot zone. The pink areas here, San Elizario and Clint, and the area in between them. So that's the focus of this zone. But in order to provide access to desired destinations for San Elizario and Clint-based travelers, you're also allowed to take the Andale service into Socorro and to destinations like Mission Valley Transfer Center and EPCC. As long as one of your endpoints is within the San Elizario and Clint area, you're eligible to use the service. Now, the future zones, we've identified on this map a future Andale zone, potentially, again, in Canutillo, one in Horizon Sparks, and then identified Socorro as a potential standalone zone. This is based on their population and their population density and the number of major destinations that are contained within those communities. And again, this is very illustrative because we still haven't gotten the results of our pilot evaluation of the San Elizario Clint zone. So what we determined or what we learned from the San Elizario and Clint pilot will shape what we might do in the future with Andale. And I'll note that Horizon City, Sparks, Canutillo, Socorro, Homestead Meadows South, and Fabens, they all have population densities that are more than sufficient for microtransit, but they also have, they're high enough that fixed route transit service is likely to be more cost effective in those communities. The reason why Fabens and Homestead Meadows are not shown on the map, though, is because of the locations of the major destinations. In Homestead Meadows South, for example, if you wanted to travel to a clinic or another major destination, you would most likely travel to El Paso. So you could get on the future Route 20 bus and take that into the El Paso area and reach your destination in that sense. So microtransit would actually be duplicating fixed route service in that scenario, which is why, again, we don't have it on the map here, but, pending the board and what the board's interest and what we learned from the pilot study, we might change where this future zones are. And right now, these are things that are happening, more than 3 years out. So they're not in the TDP right now. So happy to talk more about that if you guys have questions. The third component is the user side subsidy program, which is a partnership between ETA and other transportation providers to provide on-demand trips, within the service area, and which would be subsidized by ETA. The idea being that sometimes it's less expensive per trip for ETA to subsidize a trip on an existing provider than it is to provide that trip using, say, ETA access, which is a higher cost per trip. So the service plan talks about conditions under which a program like this might work. Like, trips, for example, would be contained within the outer county or feed ETA or Paso routes, or they would serve permitted destinations like Sun Metro Transfer Centers. All trip purposes are eligible. Riders would register in advance for the program. We've spelled out in the service plan some parameters for how the service might work in terms of a fare structure, because again, the providers are not ETA, so they aren't subject to ETA's fare-free policy. But maybe a base fare of $3 per one-way trip is paid by the rider to the provider. Then ETA could cover up to $25 beyond that, and then we could cap the number of trips per rider per month at, say, 40 one-way trips per rider per month. The idea being that we want to use these kinds of policies to manage demand, and ultimately this will depend on the availability and the policies of the partner providers. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in the implementation section of this presentation. The fourth component is the volunteer driver program. The ETA is not likely to be the administrator of the program. So what's really written into the service plan is how ETA could operate as a sponsor of the VDP driver program or as a supporter. By sponsor, we're talking about things like providing mileage reimbursement for eligible trips, or by providing a wheelchair accessible vehicle if needed, and if that needs to be provided, and it can be worked out with the specific VDP administrator. So the idea is that the mileage reimbursement, you would be eligible for that by ETA if you make a trip that has at least one endpoint in the outer county and is contained entirely within the whole of El Paso County. So no trips to San Antonio, I'm afraid. There wouldn't be any restrictions on trip purpose, service days or service hours, and there's no fare or fee, at least not charged by ETA. The VDP administrator may have another approach. The reimbursement can be linked to the U.S. General Services Administration mileage reimbursement rate or another value that we can determine. And that reimbursement can also be offset by other sponsors. So if you have a rider who is a veteran and they're eligible for benefits from a veterans program for transportation, then that reimbursement may also account for that source of funding as well. Ultimately, there's a lot that's going to depend on the service area of the VDP administrator and their policies, but I'll talk about that a little bit more in the implementation section too. So, but first, integration. So that's 4 different services that operate in very different ways, and we recognize that that could be confusing for somebody who's approaching it for the first time and trying to decide, well, how do I get, what are my options? What's the best option for me? And so the recommendation is to hire an ETA mobility manager. And this has already been discussed. And the responsibilities of the mobility manager are coordinating and planning the GPDRT services. So this person would be responsible for recruiting providers to participate in things like the user side subsidy program, managing agreements with those providers, educating the public about GPDRT services, registering riders for services, helping them navigate the services that are available and helping them figure out how to use the services. They could do periodic evaluations of the services, and they can bring together stakeholders and partners to talk about potential improvements, changes, and things like that. The other piece of the component integration is integrated scheduling to the extent that it's possible. Like, for example, it is possible in some scheduling software for general public dial-a-ride trips, so in this case, commingled ETA access trips, to be integrated with, say, a VDP's driver availability, and you could have that integrated into one scheduling platform. And then also the opportunity to integrate the different services within the planned ETA app, or potentially an app provided by one of the other partners in one of the services. So this table, I won't go into it in a ton of detail in the interest of time, but it's just an example of a tool that maybe a mobility manager would have at hand when they're talking to a new rider. Like, okay, so here's our services that are available that meet different kinds of trip purposes. Like if somebody needs a same-day trip, a spontaneous trip, they want to make a recurring trip that occurs every day at 9, or not every day, but every Tuesday at 9 o'clock or something like that, as a subscription trip, and their trip is contained within one zone, then these are kind of like the options that would be available to make that particular trip, given in some cases, like with the user side subsidy program, if you're going to take a taxi service, it really depends on, the parameters of that, taxi service as well, and what their fare structure is. So in terms of implementation, in the near term, the recommended plan for ETA access is to commingle ADA and general public trips on ETA access starting in the next fiscal year. Monitor the ridership, track the number of requests that can't be accommodated due to capacity, specifically the general public trips, because we have to accommodate the ADA eligible trips. Revise the operations contract if needed to make sure that we are able to meet as much of the demand as possible and potentially acquire additional vehicles. The transit development plan identified a need for 2 vehicles to do this, 2 new vehicles to do this, and then continue to ensure there are no capacity restrictions for ADA paratransit trips. I'll talk more about this. I got another thought on this one, but I'll get to it in one of the later slides. ETA on delay, the plan there is to continue the pilot service in San Elizario and Clint, and then evaluate it after a year of operation. So that'll put us in October of this year, and that would include talking to riders as well. And then we can adjust the service to improve performance if it's needed, and reevaluate again after 6 months, and then decide to implement it as a permanent service or conclude the pilot or the program depending on its performance after that 6-month period. And then we can use the lessons that we've learned from the pilot to plan potential new ETA on delay zones. The near-term actions for the user side subsidy program are for ETA to form a working group to investigate the development of a user-side subsidy program that serves the Outer County. And through that working group, you invite and you identify providers, transportation providers who may want to participate in the program. You talk about goals, a fare structure, and funding that can be used to help provide the subsidy. Negotiating contracts with the providers, that would be a responsibility of the ETA mobility manager. Then you launch a pilot service, which may or may not cover the whole Outer County. You analyze your costs, your ridership, and other performance, make adjustments to the program, and then use that to decide if the program needs to be modified or if it can be expanded to the full Outer County. And in the VDP case, that one also starts with forming a working group to investigate the development of a VDP. And through that working group, which you would invite, partners and potential VDP administrators, you would, identify who that administrator might be. ETA could provide input on the VDP development, mileage reimbursement policies, all sorts of things. There's a report that was released, a guidebook rather, just in this month by National RTAP that talks about developing a VDP, and it's oriented toward the agency that would be the administrator of the VDP, and it has a lot of useful information in it. Then we look at a pilot implementation, which again, that might cover a sub-area of the Outer County. It kind of depends on who the VDP administrator is and what their purview is. We evaluate after the pilot. We look at usage. We look at costs. We get feedback from the riders and from the drivers. We make evaluations, and then if we've determined that the pilot was effective, we can expand it to the full Outer County and convert it and support converting it into a permanent VDP. It's also possible that you could have multiple VDPs operating in the region. There are models like Austin, for example, there's several VDPs that cover the entire region, but those are decisions that can be made as part of that working group process. So over the long term, what we found and what I alluded to earlier about Homestead Meadows South is that there are cases where ETA Andale service and ETA Paseo service might be duplicative. And if ETA Andale service turns out to be very, very productive, there may be cases in which we may want to modify fixed route services in order to focus on Andale. Again, we don't know that yet. We need to wait until we see what our pilot service outcomes are and look at potential outcomes in specific sub areas within the Outer County. But that's something to keep in mind for the long term. And there's just overall considerations is that available funds might constrain what we can implement in a given fiscal year. And if there's a limitation, our recommendation is to focus on commingled ETA access as the priority, because commingled ETA access would cover 100% of the service area. That's a goal of ETA. And it would also leverage existing resources, existing contracts, and it's not as likely to get held up by the decisions of other providers. So it's something that we can do, in-house more or less. Funding availability might also limit the scale of the pilots. That's why I acknowledge that in some cases, the pilot projects might not cover the whole Outer County. They may just cover a sub-area of the county. The timelines for the user-side subsidy program and the VDP implementation will depend on the participation of other entities. And another note is that user-side subsidy program trips aren't reportable to the National Transit Database, so we would have to monitor usage and costs and adjust policies to manage demand, because we don't want to affect ridership to the point that it also affects the ridership. I mean, the amount of federal funding that is available to us based on our ridership or based on things like passenger miles. As ET is moving forward with developing a performance measurement program and service standards for board adoption later in 2026. So our service plan does include the performance measures that were originally developed in previous studies, the implementation plan from 2023, and the ADA plan from 2024, as well as the measures that were used in the GPDRT study that I'm talking about today to help develop and evaluate alternatives. They include things like total ridership, onboard travel time, how many trips are completed, how many trips are shared rides. So there's a lot of measures like that that basically will form the foundation of the performance measures that will be developed in the official performance measurement and service standards process. So next steps is approval of the final report and service plan today, if the board is willing to do that. And then we will make updates to the transit development plan if needed to address any of your comments today that need to be reflected in that. And that's all I have.
That was a lot.
Sorry.
No, that was great. Thank you, Kelly, for that overview. Does the board have any questions?
I would just like to add that if the board is interested in this type of service, this is definitely a service that would function in the rural area. So we would focus on rural funds to pay for this through TxDOT, whether it's 5311, 5310 rural, or any other potential rural grants that could exist, potentially partnerships with the Rio Grande Council of Governments, Area Agency on Aging. It's another opportunity to get older American Act funds for this. So this would be incorporated into the fiscal year 27 financial plan or beyond, utilizing those fund sources.
So for the current pilot, the commingled rides, is that data counted both ways for a paratransit trip and towards the?
It would be counted as a demand response trip under NTD. However, the ADA trip, so if there's like two passengers, one's ADA, one's a general public passenger, the ADA passenger will be reported under ADA paratransit on the NTD report, but the general public passenger will be reported as a regular passenger trip.
So you're getting value allocation wise.
Yes, for the two trips. But it also, from a funding perspective, the paratransit trip would be funded through the 5307, perhaps using like the paratransit set aside, whereas the general public trip would just be funded through traditional 5307 at the 50-50 split.
And the way the pilot's being run now, so the paratransit trips are pre-booked and the dial rides on demand. So how does that sync? Is it the dispatcher receives the call and is redirecting the driver who might already be in the area on an ADA trip? Or
that is correct, because the ADA trip is already known. So that manifest was already done. So you're now inserting general public trips as it makes sense, and without like affecting the ADA trip, but the vehicle's already in the vicinity. So it could, in theory, pick up the GP trip, drop off the ADA passenger, to drop off the GP passenger, and then go to its next pickup.
And is all the dispatching and evaluation of the 3/4 miles, is all that being done manually by TransDev, or is there any software app involved?
We have Trapeze right now, and I'll be pending El Paso County purchasing's approval. We'll bring a potential contract for a new scheduling software before this board next month, and then commissioner's court after this board approves.
And that'll be used in the pilot?
That'll be used in the pilot and in the current paratransit program. The new software that we're proposing has the capabilities to do the commingling effectively compared to the current software we have today.
So an ADA user or a dial ride would both access it through the app?
That is correct.
There was a recommendation to put together a working group. Is that premature now?
I would say if the board is in, after accepting this report, should the board accept this report, perhaps the working group could be helpful in determining, like, are there other jurisdictions that want on-delay service besides San Elizario and Clinton, for instance? And then to understand the impacts of creating an on-delay program, as well as how does that on-delay program engage with the Paseo program?
Yeah. I can tell you, I would like to study the use of on-delay in areas outside of fixed route, like parts of Montana Vista or Homestead Meadows and Waco Taves that currently don't have access to any services. So I would very much would serve on a working group for that purpose.
I presume, Kelly, we can work with you and setting up that working group and have you guys help facilitate that for us?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
I think that was a yes.
Yes, of course. Sorry, my voice is fading out.
So any other questions or comments on this report? I think it's scheduled for action.
Yes, to accept the report.
To your point, I guess de facto then, if I'm an 88 passenger who's outside the 3 miles, I can now use Huntley instead.
Correct, because we won't have that ADA obligation anymore. So everybody is now treated as an on-delay rider in theory.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the report?
Move to approve.
A second.
By Mr. Ardubio and a second by Ed Fonde. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the next item, 6C, discussion and possible action regarding the revised draft transition plan. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm here on this action. I'm presenting a final draft transition plan. As you know, last month I brought before this transition plan, which is meant to lay the foundation on how ETA intends to separate from El Paso County government and be its own independent transit agency, which has been the direction of this board in El Paso County for some time now. This transition plan is meant to be a framework on how we get there. And it lists all of the various impacts, implications, things we need to consider, and provides information on decision points that this board will need to make over the course of the next, we're now down to 7 months. This document also will provide a foundation and like a projected timeline on how we can get to the final goal of separation by the time following steps have taken into place. One, we have received a split letter from Sun Metro and have become a direct recipient of FTA. 2, TxDOT has transferred over the Rural Transit District status from El Paso County to EPATS. So that's the financial funding stream that will help this entity thrive. And then 3, that we have agreements in place with El Paso County to 1, transfer the assets, contracts, and grants over to EPATS, as well as a master agreement with El Paso County for various services to, at least for the first couple of years, ensure that EPATS is successful. That includes office space, human resources support, county auditor support, and other functions that El Paso County is presently providing to EPATS at no cost, but it's going to cost EPATS in the future. And as the organization matures and grows, perhaps some of those functions could be brought internal to EPATS or contracted out to other parties. This document is not committing the board to making decisions right now, like as it relates to staffing or financial contributions at this time. It's merely just to present a guide on how we can get there. Over the course of the next 7 months, I'll be bringing before various decision points that the board will need to make, such as policies and procedures to govern ETA operations, a procurement policy, financial procedures, a budget, a financial plan, new interlocal agreements for local match fundings, the transfer of assets, contracts, or remaining grants from El Paso County to us. And then the most critical one is finalizing how do you want to staff ETA? And we'll be talking with Human Resources later on some options for the board to consider. But this transition plan does lay out those options. In addition, the transition plan has an appendix, a comprehensive appendix that lists basically all the assets that could potentially come to ETA, all of the contracts at El Paso County that would come to ETA, all of the grants, job descriptions, the pay salaries that the staff would have, the fleet inventory, the bus stop inventory, potential policies that EPATS will need to create, perhaps with the help of El Paso County, should this board and the Commissioners Court approve a master agreement with them, as well as where our capital projects lie with the Regional Mobility Authority and projects that ETA staff is presently doing at hand. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this draft transition plan if there are any.
Had a couple of questions. The first one is like, what are the main benefits to splitting? As far as like when you apply for grants, does that put the GTA in a better position for grants?
My understanding was the whole creation of EPATs was to start engaging the local governments in the decision-making and funding of public transit outside of the city limits of El Paso and lay the foundation for ultimately creating a countywide regional transportation authority. So that's kind of some of the justifications for the split. It also allows ETA to only focus, the ability for this board to focus on just transit only. Transit is one element of El Paso County Commissioner's Court's responsibilities. And at times it can get, I have no disrespect to the Commissioner's Court, but distracted by other county issues. So by creating a board and having a policy board for the system, now that transit gets its dedicated attention from not only the county, but also the member agencies that are contributing into the system.
And then my second question is like, will there be any impact to the employees that you currently have that are going to transition over to ETA?
So that's what we're going to discuss with Human Resources today under the closed meeting. However, the transition plan lays out 3 potential options that this board can consider. One option is that the employees are just solely dedicated to ETA as ETA employees. The second option is that contract with the county and the county provides the employees. The third option is a new option that I added from discussions with county human resources and county administration, where the employees are still employees of ETA, but the county provides human resources support, such as policy development, the benefits, recruitment assistance, and any other human resource necessary items, since ETA won't be ready to have its like own full-fledged dedicated human resources department at the start. So at the end, the goal is to have minimal impacts to the employees. So what you heard today earlier with the retirement, how it's not going to have any impacts there. We would like to do the same with the benefits. We would like to replicate the exact benefits that the county has for the EPATS employees. And the way we can get there is like through interlocal with county human resources. And then I think the last piece is on the pay and the salary, making sure that they're still being compensated the same or better if the board wants to pay more. But of course, that's all out to money. And then I think another thing that we also need to resolve too is due process. And that's something that we would rely on county human resources to help us ensure that we have a fair due process approach for like employee disciplines and whatnot, because employees would no longer be treated as civil service because they would no longer be county employees.
Thank you for that. Appreciate this.
Human resources, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think we'll be able to answer a lot of those questions we'll present.
Thank you.
Again, this is a draft. There's a lot of information in this plan. A lot of due diligence has gone into this and will continue going into this. Thank you to the staff and Mr. Ando for being so diligent about putting this plan together. I'll say again, I don't think that we anticipated this happening within your first year at ETA, but I think that both the Commissioner's Court and this board have been consistent about this being the path forward in order to be a truly regional transit board and be able to maximize the services that we provide in partnership with everybody in El Paso County. So, you know, I think now we're seeing the rubber hit the road. This process is going to get very real, very fast. And so, you know, I hope this board understands this is going to be the work for us over the next 6 months, is seeing this plan through.
I'd like to add also that the communities, the municipalities have direct access on the board of directors.
Right.
You'll be voting on the decisions that benefit your community. To say that they weren't under the county, but you know, it's just you you have greater participation, greater input, and your voices will be heard a lot more.
Right, it's like the training wheels are going to be coming off here pretty quickly. So thank you for your leadership, for steering the ship during this time. I know that our primary priority is to make sure that the employees are impacted as positively through this transition as possible. And so we'll talk about that in executive session. But until then, are there any other questions or comments on this draft plan, which again, we can amend and revisit at any point?
That is correct. This will be a working document for throughout the next 6 months, but this is the first attempt of having a plan documented because this has been discussed multiple occasions from the time TTI started the regional transit study in 2016 up until this point where we've actually now put it in basically a plan that you guys can now follow through and ensure that each step is each step is implemented as we get to the finish line.
Is this for action?
I was in action to accept basically this plan, and then this would be then presented to the Commissioners Court to then also accept, and then this is the foundation to the master agreement, transfer of assets, MOU, and then future actionable items that will come before this board.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve draft plan.
A second.
A motion to approve by Commissioner Butler and a second by Mr. Eddie Conde. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item 6B, the receiver report from the Executive Director regarding El Paso Transportation Authority staff activities. Mr. John.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, it's been another busy month at ETA. I commend my team in helping us deliver the various projects that we've been able to deliver. And a summary of those activities are in the board packet. I do also want to say that we've seen a good increase in ridership since we've gone fare free. If you look at the various charts in the report, you'll see that everything is trending upward with the exception of the Gold Route and the van pool program. The van pool program, unfortunately, we've lost some vans. And I think that's just due to seasonal fluctuations, but we're hoping to get back to the 158 vans that we've budgeted for. The Gold Route looks like it was trending upward, but trending downward. And that could also be because New Mexico State University goes on break in the wintertime and then returns back. So we may see it trend back upward again. But I do want to say it appears that the fare-free service is working. People are making more trips on the transit system. So we're definitely providing a great mobility opportunity for people countywide. I'm grateful to El Paso County for allowing us to utilize that 145,000 to redirect to make this project happen.
I'm glad it's having a positive impact. Hopefully it will continue.
I would also like to add, I did receive a support letter request from Sun Metro. I'd like to sign that letter and submit that to Sun Metro, and then I'll bring that letter because it became after the event, after the board agenda was produced. I will present that letter to the board at next month's meeting. But Carl, maybe you can highlight on what the project's for.
Yeah, but will you be able to return it by?
Yeah, that's my design.
Yeah, it's a letter of support for a grant we're applying for an upgrade to our CNG fueling facilities, which actually is a knockdown benefit to ETA because obviously you fuel at our location. So if we can secure that funding, this will ensure our ability to upgrade the equipment to hopefully eliminate, but we'll just say greatly minimize the chance of service interruption as we've had in the past with some of our equipment due to its age and unique, a limited number of firms that can fix them and replace the parts. So we're hopeful that we can get these funds and then put together an even bigger and better fuel facility.
I've also been participating on the MPO board of directors. I've been at this is my third meeting. Anna and I did orientation to understand our role of being, or my role of being on the board of directors as well. There hasn't been any really transit discussions that have occurred in the 3 months, but I am including copies of the MPO agenda as well as the MPO minutes, just so that this board is aware of the activities that are going on at the MPO. And then I believe I'll be getting with the chair on future executive committee meetings to talk more on any policy directions that this board may have that they want me to carry out with the MPO. I just want to make sure I've captured everything. Oh, and then the last thing we'll be bringing before the Commissioner's Court, and as part of the consent calendar the board approved. We're coming to kind of the finish line on the design of the proposed transit operations and maintenance facility that we received funds from the FTA to basically construct. However, while there is some funding left over from the purchase of the right-of-way that the county has provided within their 1.5 million, there is a shortfall to get to the 60% threshold. And we'll be requesting from the County Commissioner's Court 165,000 potentially that could come out of the transit contingency fund that is held within the general fund at El Paso County to cover that deficit. I will also be asking the RMA to come before this board and just give another update on where they stand with all of the capital projects, as well as to the Commissioner's Court, so that both boards are fully aware of any where we stand with both the passenger shelter project and the facility project. Are there any pitfalls, challenges, or funding deficits that the boards need to be made aware of? At the present time, since these are El Paso County projects, the funding burden lies with El Paso County, but I do want to preface and it's explained in the transition plan that once all of the assets, grants, and contracts are transferred over to EPATS, that project will become an EPATS project. So if there's any funding deficits or issues, we need to figure out a way to fund that, whether it be through pursuit of additional grants through TxDOT, asking the members for additional contributions, but I just want this board to be fully aware. And we're bringing you in early now so that you're aware of the impacts going into the future.
I was surprised to find out that we didn't have funding to complete the design.
We'll get it to 60%.
To get it to 60% before we got the funding for the construction of the project. So luckily we do have that contingency fund.
John, it's come up a few times, but I guess in the past, the member allocations usually come out late in the summer. What are your projections for getting those out this year?
Is Michael Walk still on the line?
He said in his presentation, preliminary numbers next month. So I said probably by May, by the time we're able to get some firm numbers to the municipalities, hopefully.
That's good.
I know in the case of Sun Metro, we've presented some options for Sun Metro's participation. TTI has done an analysis. I will be sharing that with you as well on their calculations. And I think we'll, at least on the Sun Metro side, we'll go from there on what that looks like. And if it doesn't occur for this fiscal year, definitely for next fiscal year, what your share would be.
Appreciate that.
And also, if I might add, John's participation with the Regional Planning Committee, we're in the midst of completing the 2027 to 2031 regional plan. And so certainly ETA's participation is an important part of it. It's 6 counties, besides El Paso, the other 5 counties east.
Wonderful.
Thank you. My report.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, we can move on.
Moving on to agenda item 6E, receive report of transit operations for the month of January 2026. This will be presented by Jennifer Garcia in the absence of Ms. Vanessa.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Ms. Chairwoman. For the month of January, we had a couple of presentations by El Paso Center for Children for our buses to become a safe space. And it was really informative. Now all of our drivers know what to do in case they encounter as children up to the age of 24 in need of help. So it was really good presentation. So those were our activities for January. Now for our key metrics, we had 0 preventable accidents, 1 non-preventable accident. For the fixed route, we were at 94.6 on time performance. Paratransit 96.36. Our annual riders, it went up to 270. Our annual trips, we were at 122. For our fixed route, it was also up from last month by 1,296, with a total of 12,454 of ridership. Paratransit, we were at 524, which the numbers also, they are all going up with the riderships. For the paratransit trips, we were at 660. Our clients in the service area for our paratransit, we were at 200 with 17 a total of 217 approved clients. We had 2 road calls. Our preventative maintenance is at 100% with 31 preventative maintenance completed. We were fully staffed with 29 drivers for the fixed route, 12 for the paratransit drivers, and we will be hiring for another driver in March so we can have an extra person helping out in case of vacation or calling. And that's it.
Thank you for the updates. Okay. I think that takes care of
All the business items.
the business items.
Would you like to move into executive session at this time?
Yes. Think we need a motion to go into executive.
That's correct.
A
second.
Motion to go into executive session by Mr. Hartley, and is seconded by Eddie Tonya. All those in favor? No, you're part of the
Okay, yes. Okay. So, Commissioner, we're back on. Press 8. Okay. There it is. If you can read 18. Executive Director to develop a personnel merit for the El Paso development of personnel policy and procedures, and for presentation and possible action by the Board of Directors at a future meeting. Mr. Randall?
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the board, I just asked, based on the discussions at closed meeting today, I just asked for authorization to start working with, on a development of a personnel merit system, and I'll return back to the board with, approvals for that system. And then also working with El Paso County Human Resources to come back, as it relates to benefits considerations for this board to consider.
I second.
A motion by Mr. Argobi and a second by Mr. Eddie Conde. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Moving on to item 8C, adopt El Paso County's job descriptions and pay scale for use by the El Paso Transportation Authority as defined in the transition plan. Mr. John Randall?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, the purpose of this action is to help set the framework for preparing the personnel merit system as meeting job descriptions and a pay scale. And to ensure consistency, we recommend that this board adopt El Paso County's current job descriptions and pay scale for use by us in our future personnel merit system. Move to approve.
I second.
A motion by Mr. Argobi and a second by Eddie Conde. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That takes us to item 9, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Eddie Conde and a second by Argobi. We are adjourning meeting at 5:04 p.m.